eventually move and become the Reformation. And lastly, we'll look at the impact of the Renaissance. How many of you can hear my cat?
Yep.
I
I love
can.
the sound of your
Yeah.
cat. It's very nice.
Hold on, I need to bring the guy out.
I like the sound of the cat. It wasn't bad.
How he looks like, he needs to go out. 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 And then you can see that there, right? Can you see the one there? Can you see this one? Okay, let's continue. Now, the urban society in the late medieval Europe. By the 14th century, there are things that are changing in Europe. One, remember when we talk about the bourgeois in the Middle Ages? The bourgeois are the people who stayed within the burg. So they stay in the city. One thing about the bourgeois is that the bourgeois did not have to pay to the lords. They did not pay, they are not tied to the lords, they did not have to work for the lord, they did not have to pay taxes to the lord, but instead they pay to the sovereign. So in the towns were the center of political power of the sovereign. For example, the king. In London, there is no Lord of London. The Lord of London is basically the King of England. So the townspeople put their taxes directly to the sovereign, not to the local lord. So the towns have their own set of power, and if the towns become bigger and bigger and bigger, the sovereigns becomes more powerful. So in the late medieval Europe, it is not the lord of the area that is powerful, but the sovereign is getting more and more powerful. Remember, in the Middle Ages, it is the church that is powerful. The sovereign is subservient to the church. But by late medieval Europe, because of trade, because of selling, towns are usually market towns. They buy and sell. There are a lot of merchants. So they become richer and richer and richer. So the sovereign become more and more and more powerful. So that is important about the late medieval Europe, is that the urban society become more powerful. That means the rural Europe becomes less powerful. The rural areas are where the lords have the power, and the kings are now becoming more powerful. The second part about European society in the late Middle Ages is that the peasants, they seem to know their position in society. Prior to this, in the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, the peasants were tied to the land. The peasants were controlled by the lords. The lords ask the peasants to do, the peasants will do. No need to ask any questions. But the Black Death changed everything. The Black Death resulted in half, 30%, 40% of the peasants dying, which means now you have not enough hands and legs to do all the work. So the peasants becomes very important. The lord depend on the peasants so that the food can go to the market. Okay, so which means now the peasants, they know their position. They know their position, they are willing to question the lord and tell them, hey, you don't have my help, you cannot sell your things to the market, so you need me to help. So the peasants are demanding their position. And when the lords abuse the peasants, okay, for example, when the lords take advantage of the peasants, there is a rebellion. Rebellions will take place. Okay, so the rebellions will take place when they are unhappy with the lords. Two most important rebellions in European history is the Jacquerie Rebellion and the Lollard Rebellion. Let's watch this short video clip.
For most of the 13th and early 14th century, England had an almost Mediterranean feel. Bumper crops and a booming economy, and the population doubled. But then that old enemy of the English struck. No, I don't mean the All Blacks, I mean the weather. Heavy rain and low temperatures caused crops to rot and entire villages to sink. People were starving to death. Surely it couldn't get any worse than this. But it could. On top of the famine came something even more dreadful, the Black Death. An already weakened population was devastated. To many people, it seemed that God...
What happened?
Position to call the shots. Peasants began to refuse to fulfill their feudal duties. They started to negotiate wage increases and even began to be paid in hard cash. Some left their manors and acquired their own free land. All this, of course, got up the noses of the aristocracy. If there was more wealth around, they saw no reason why the peasants should have it. So they introduced laws to restore compulsory labour and force wages back down to the levels before the Black Death. But what seems to have especially irritated the aristocracy was the way the peasants were dressing. This season's peasant ditched drab workwear in favour of bright colours, tighter hose and even fur. Some peasants were spending almost the same on clothes as certain noblemen. So laws were introduced dictating what different classes could wear. The final straw was when the barons imposed a poll tax to pay for their war in France. This was bitterly resented because it meant that everybody had to pay the same, rich or poor. And to make matters worse, the government got its sums wrong. They based their calculations on the population size before the Black Death. So when they failed to raise the amount they expected, they imposed a second poll tax. And that was when the unthinkable happened. The peasants took up arms and revolted. From all over England, they converged on Canterbury and marched to London, maybe as many as 60,000 of them. With no emails or mobile phones, how could the peasants have organised all this? Could it be that they were making use of their newly acquired literacy to spread word of the revolt? Two of the chroniclers record what they claim were letters that the peasants were circulating amongst themselves. Now, the letters are written in English, but they're very cryptic, and we don't really know what they mean. But it could be that they contain detailed, coded instructions for the revolt. This is the one in Thomas Walsingham's chronicle. And you can see here it says, John Sheep greeteth well John Nameless and John the Miller, and biddeth them chastise well Hob the Robber, and look, shape you to one head and no more. Knoweth your friend from your foe, have it enough, and say who. Now, it may be that when it says chastise well Hob the Robber, those are instructions to the peasants not to do any looting, and only to destroy documents and records. And then it says, look, shape you to one head, no more. Well, it could be just instructions saying, just only have one leader. But on the other hand, it may be instructions to go on pilgrimage to Canterbury, where the peasants assembled first. And the focal point was the head of Thomas a Becket. And finally it says, knoweth your friend from your foe, and say who. These could be absolute rigid instructions to distinguish your friends from your enemy by the battle cry. The climax of the peasants' revolt must rank as one of the most extraordinary scenes in history. Tens of thousands of rebelling peasants confronted the country's aristocracy, led by the king, a 14-year-old boy. The peasants' leader, Wat Tyler, rode towards the boy king to make his demands, and then took a swig from a jug of ale, whereupon the mayor of London charged and cut him down. It looked as if the huge throng were about to attack the aristocracy, but the king suddenly rode forward and shouted, I'll be your leader, follow me. The king granted the peasants pardons and promised to abolish serfdom. But once the rebels had dispersed, the barons quickly set about slaughtering the ring. The ideal of freedom and of owing deference to no one was a lasting legacy of the medieval peasant. But there's a sting in the tail to the peasant story. The lords realized that if the peasants were now free from any labor obligation to them, they were likewise free from any obligation to care for their peasants. The social consensus of the feudal system had broken down. And there was worse to come. Peasants were about to come face to face with their real enemy, sheep. You see, your average lord could make more money out of sheep than peasants. For a start, there's a lot more wool on a sheep, and you can eat them, which is possible with peasants, but socially tricky. So the lords started to throw the troublesome and uneatable peasants off the land and replace them with these chaps. The social landscape of Britain changed forever.
So what you can see here is that in the late Middle Ages, things are changing. Okay, the peasants already they know their position in society, and the lords have no choice but to change their treatment of the peasants. They can no longer force the peasants to do everything. Okay, I think so much so that they say, okay lah, no need to do, no need to have so many peasants. Free the peasants and let them go to the cities, so that they can rear sheep and make to use sheep better than to even keep the peasants, because the peasants have no help, right? Okay? Now, which means all these things are changing in the late Middle Ages, and a new era descends on Europe. This new era in Europe is the Renaissance. The Renaissance is technically a rebirth of Europe, but not every part of Europe, but just the upper segment of society. You have two types of Renaissance. One is a change in economic and social conditions, and another is more of a cultural movement. Okay, so the change in economic and social conditions usually in Italy, okay, and the German-speaking part of Europe, the north of the Alps. It's more of a religious reforms that eventually will spark as the Reformation. So you have the German-speaking Europe. Basically, the first stage of Reformation is about to take place. But normally, when we talk about the Renaissance, we normally talk about Italy. Italy is more important than Germany. Germany will play a much more important role in the Reformation, but the start of the Renaissance in Germany will spark the Reformation movement. How many of you have seen this picture before? Iman, have you seen this before?
No, I've never seen it.
You know, Leon, this picture, does it remind you of anything?
It reminds me of somewhat the Last Supper, but that's completely different time frames.
Zane is correct.
With what?
It is Last Supper. Okay, this painting is painted by Paolo Veronese as one of the largest art canvases okay, in Venice during the Renaissance. It's supposed to be the Last Supper. But when he painted this painting, right, the church went after him. The church went after the painter, saying that, hey, you are making fun of Jesus Christ and the Last Supper. Do you notice something in this photograph, in this picture? Do you see a dwarf? And there is a baboon somewhere in the picture. I cannot see it. Enlarge it and find the monkey. Okay, so this.
There's a baboon?
Yes, there's a baboon in this picture. Okay. So the church. He said to the painter, you are making fun of the Last Supper. So he was charged for heresy. But this painting already painted. So how? The painter very smart. He tell, this is nothing to do with the Last Supper. This is actually called the Feast of the House of Levi. Changed the name of the painting and he survived. Okay, so what you can see here is that during the Renaissance, they celebrate men. Okay? They celebrate humans rather you celebrate achievements in life. So in Italy, the Renaissance in Italy is due because, number one, to the rise of the economic power of the Italian city-states, okay, especially in Florence, Venice, Milan, and Pisa. Okay. For the first time, these states, they are getting rich from trade and financial, because they do a lot of buy and sell with the Muslim world, okay, with the Mediterranean, to the whole entire of the Mediterranean. And then what you have rich princes. These city-states are not huge, big states like France or England. They are very small city-states ruled by princes or oligarchies. And the change come about is due to money. Okay, these city-states became rich because they had more money and money that came from trading. And with more money, these city-states are beginning to rival the political power of the Pope. So the rise of the Italian city-states were important because for the first time, they could challenge the power of the Pope. Okay, the city-states, these city-states, as they become richer, three things will change. Individualism, the idea of putting wealth to display wealth. You can display the pride of being rich. Secularism, to differentiate God and the here and the hereafter. And then the revival of classical values, Greece and ancient Rome. So basically, the Renaissance attitude in the Italian states are based on three things: individualism, the show of wealth; secularism, the move away from the Christian church; and the revival of classical values to go back to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Okay, so the Italian Renaissance is basically a shift away from the old Catholic Church. Now, at the same time of the Italian Renaissance is that you notice that there is you see over here, right, all the university towns being developed. So during the time of the Renaissance is the spread of education. Education will play a role in the rise of Italian Renaissance. I think so. I showed you this video before, right? During our last class. Some of you will
Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa, men have named you. You're so like the lady with the mystic smile. Is it only because you're lonely they have blamed you for that Mona Lisa strangeness in your smile? Do you smile to tempt a lover, Mona Lisa? Or is this the way to hide a broken heart? Many dreams have been brought to your doorstep. They just lie there and they die there. Are you warm? Are you real, Mona Lisa? lovely work of art. Do you smile to tempt a lover, Mona Lisa? Or is this your way to hide a broken heart? Many dreams have been brought to your doorstep. They just lie there and they die there. Are you warm? Are you real, Mona Lisa? Or just a cold and lonely, lovely work of art? Mona Lisa, Mona Lisa.
Can we restart our class? Okay, because it's less than a minute more, so let's restart our class.